It was New Year's Eve, the millennium's turn, December 31, 1999. Krystal, 10, and Mark Surles, 7, arrived at a close friend's house to spend the night. The sisters argued, and Krystal insisted on Mark sleeping alone in the spare room, leaving Katie Harris, 13, and Krystal to share the bunk beds. Katie, Krystal, and Mark had a night of fun and laughter at their New Year's Eve sleepover. Katie and Krystal stayed awake in the bunk beds where they were spending the night. Mark, still enraged, went to sleep in the spare room. The New Year's Eve celebrations had concluded, and the entire family was sleeping. Their lives were forever changed around 3:50 a.m. when a cold-blooded killer broke into the house and went straight to Katie and Krystal's room. Katie fought back against her assailant, and Krystal awoke to see a tall, shadowy man grappling with her screaming friend. Despite her efforts, Katie was stabbed 16 times while Krystal looked on in horror. Krystal was paralyzed. Surles had overlooked the second child, who was sleeping on the top bunk. Krystal remained as still as she could, hoping to go unnoticed as the attacker moved around the room. The man's eyes met Krystal's just as he was about to leave the room, and he became aware of her for the first time. Surles grabbed Krystal and tried to slash her throat, but she shielded herself with her hands. "Move your hands," Surles hissed, and Krystal obeyed instinctively. The killer slit her throat. Despite her pain, bleeding, and fear, Krystal knew that playing dead was her best chance of survival. She sagged forward and lay motionless on the floor. "I just remember lying there and hearing the door close and the light turn off. So I got down on my hands and knees and crawled across the bedroom floor. And then I noticed Katie on the floor. She was making a gasping sound, or perhaps she was choking. But I was also trying to console her. I lay next to her, rubbing her back and that's when I realized I couldn't talk because all I wanted to say was, everything's going to be okay. Everything will be fine. But I couldn't do it. And then, as soon as she stopped making those noises, I had this feeling like, get out of here. Get up. Come on, let's go. Don't lie down here." Krystal stood up and ran to her sister Mark's room as quickly as she could. Krystal couldn't speak or scream because her throat had been cut, so she tried to wake her sister. Mark couldn't be roused, and Krystal worried that the killer had killed the entire family. Krystal was determined to bring assistance. Krystal began a quarter-mile walk to the nearest neighbors while holding her bleeding neck and walking completely barefoot. Krystal managed to raise the alarm by banging on the doors and writing notes to neighbors informing them that the Harris family needed assistance. Krystal was stabilized in the hospital despite having a sliced trachea. Krystal collaborated with police sketch artists and investigators from her hospital bed. Shortly after the attacks, police discovered the knife used to kill Katie Harris and injure Krystal Surles in a field near the crime scene. The 11-inch butcher knife is visible in the center of the photograph. Authorities were able to identify and locate their suspect, Tommy Lynn Surles, 24 hours after Krystal Surles worked with the forensic artist. Investigators soon discovered he had a history of murder. Surles, 35, had already served time in prison for a variety of offenses ranging from petty theft and drugs to rape and assault. Surles is thought to have started killing when he was 15 years old, when he murdered a man whose home he had broken into. It is believed that Surles also murdered women and children, though many of the crimes attributed to him remain unsolved. Surles was diagnosed with personality disorders and substance use disorder during a period of incarceration for theft in 1990, including dependence on alcohol, opioids, amphetamines, and other substances. Surles also struggled with major depression, psychosis, and bipolar disorder. He was an extremely troubled and dangerous man. During his confinement on this occasion, Surles began a relationship with a woman and married her from prison, moving in with her when he was released in 1997. Tommy Lynn Surles is linked to the disappearance and murder of a number of people, many of whom are children, between 1979 and 1999. Up to 70 cases are possible. He undoubtedly committed many heinous crimes in the late 1990s, and it was a single night and a brave young girl who put an end to his killings for good. Krystal then testified in the trial, insisting that Tommy Lynn Surles be present despite his request to be excused. The young girl detailed the events for the jury, telling them what happened to her best friend. He was covering Katie's mouth with his hand. She was in pain. She told me to stay put and not move with her eyes, so I didn't. He slit her throat with the knife, and she collapsed. Tommy Lynn Surles was convicted of murder and sentenced to death. During his time on death row, Surles confessed to numerous other crimes, including the murder of Joel Harper, a 10-year-old boy whose mother was fighting to be released from prison after being convicted of the crime. In 2006, she was released. Tommy Lynn Surles was executed by lethal injection on April 3, 2014, at the Texas State Penitentiary in Huntsville. The Harris and Perez families, as well as Krystal Surles, were present at the execution. Surles' two friends were also present, and he smiled faintly at them as he entered on his gurney. Krystal, center, was reunited with her younger sisters, Mark, left, and Amber, weeks after the incident. They become closer than ever before. Krystal is still close to her younger sisters, Mark, left, and Amber, 10 years after the incident. In the summer of 2009, they posed for a photo. They say Krystal is like a second mother to them. Krystal Surles has turned 20. She lives in Idaho with her father, Mark, on the right, and is putting money aside for college. "I am fortunate and grateful to be here," she says. "I never think of Tommy Lynn Surles. I never give him my full attention." What are your thoughts on the Krystal Surles case? I really appreciate your input. Thank you for taking the time to watch. Be a part of the Crime Diaries family and hit the subscribe button now.